Welcome back to my channel. I'm Traben, and it was a busy week, but not for reading. Let's talk about it. Yes, I only read 2 books this week, but I had a lot of other stuff going on. We completely rearranged our comic book shelf. I spent most of Friday into Saturday at a Magic the Gathering tournament. Hopefully, next week will be a better week for reading. I probably won't be on for a few more weeks for updates, so I'm going to have a lot more to talk about in the what I might read next section of the video. But let's talk about what I did read this week. Starting with Carl's Doomsday Scenario, which is the second book in the Dungeon Crawler Carl series. This is one that I think I'm going to touch on again once I read book 3, because there's something unique about the way this particular series is written, or at least something I've not seen very much before, and I want to discuss that and talk more in depth about the series and the feeling the series is giving me. But as for this volume, it's very much in line with what I said for my review of the first book. It is entertaining throughout. I feel like I'm getting a better sense of the vibe that the author is going for on whether things are supposed to be like funny or dark. We're kind of still finding that balance between the two, but I feel like this hit on that a lot better than the first book. But it still retains all the problems I had with Volume 1 as well, namely that while this does tell the complete story of Carl's adventures on level 3, and it does culminate in a rather exciting climax for the level, I do feel like ultimately these aren't self-contained stories. Matt Dinniman seems much more cognizant and much more concerned with the wider story that he's telling, the longer story that he's telling over the course of these possibly 16 or 17 books than he is with any given volume. So I'll touch more on that in my review once I get through another one of the books. But ultimately, this landed at a 4-star for me. It's always entertaining, but you might be put off by not feeling like the story given in a particular book is narratively satisfying as its own self-contained narrative. I also read Transformers Volume 3, Combiner Chaos. This is the 3rd volume in the Skybound Energon Universe line. This line has Transformers, Void Rivals, now it's got a G.I. Joe title, there was a Cobra Commander, a Duke, and a Destro volume as well. And I'm not sure if those were one-shots or if those are also ongoings, but it is the kind of amalgamation of those different lines from the 80s, all in a shared universe. So we have, I think, some Cobra characters coming into this volume. There's a Hiss Tank. It's definitely aiming toward nostalgia in certain aspects, but it's also one of the more brutally violent depictions of Transformers that I've seen. It's incredibly bleak. There are characters dying, getting blasted apart, coming back to life and begging for death. So it's a little bit odd. I'm not sure quite how to feel about it, because I love Daniel Warren Johnson's art and I usually love his comics, but I'm not sure if this gritty retelling of Transformers is really what I want from a Transformers series. Void Rivals, for me, is a more enjoyable title. It's more of like that space opera narrative. This is more of like a grimdark look at the Transformers universe. But given that, and I knew going into Volume 3 what I was getting into, I do feel like it's doing a good job in trying to juggle several different narratives and many different character perspectives, because one thing that Transformers is not short on is a number of characters that you can bring up and do all sorts of things with. So we have characters that are becoming disaffected from the war. They're wanting to stop the fighting or stop fighting entirely. We have characters that have become more vicious because of changes in the structures of the different factions. We have characters kind of losing faith in Optimus and his vision, and Optimus himself is struggling with some sort of unknown issue with his programming, in which he will sometimes lose control of his actions. So there's a lot of nuance in here, even though most of the reason why I think people would pick this up is the spectacle of the robot fights and those action sequences that you get from a Daniel Warren Johnson comic. I'm still giving it 4 stars. I do think that gets a little bit of bump from the nostalgia and for it being in the Transformers line. I still think it's worth the read, but I do think you need to know what you're getting into before you pick it up. That's it as far as what I read this week. Let's talk about what's coming up in the following weeks, because it's going to be probably a solid 2 weeks or possibly 3 before I make another video. It's going to be a while. Wanted to make sure I had plenty to talk about as far as like what's coming up in my TBR. So one of the things is I am reading The 3-Body Problem on audiobook. I'm about a fifth of the way through at this point, but I've only sat and listened for a couple of different sessions, and it's not that long of an audiobook, so I do feel like I will wrap that up fairly soon. My wife and I have been off and on reading The Midnight Feast on audiobook as well, and I got that one. I have that one checked out right now, so hopefully next week we'll find some time to finish that one up. We're about halfway through that title. I was also about halfway through the audiobook for Empire of Silence before my minutes ran up on Spotify, so I went to my local Barnes & Noble and picked up a physical copy. I have found my place in this book, and I am on page 268 out of about 600 pages. So not quite halfway there, but getting kind of close. So this is one that I'm going to be prioritizing pretty hard in this following week. I really want to get through this and not have this be another Dune situation. I don't think I have as much appreciation for the books that take so long and are so disjointed throughout many months of reading. As I mentioned, I do have Dungeon Crawler Carl Book 3, which is the Dungeon Anarchist Cookbook. This one ramps up the story size quite significantly. So this is almost a 500-page book. I think that the previous one was about 350. So we're looking at another 150 more pages than the last read. I really enjoy this series, but I would like to read one more before I do another kind of wrap up and discussion about what I like about the series, what I'm not liking so far. My local Barnes & Noble has the next 2 books at least. So once I get finished with those, I'll probably pick up more. But one that I do not want to take too much time, because having read book 2, I'm also aware that Dinniman does not do a good job with reminding you of all the plot points of the previous book. It is more or less expected that you retain some of the key events from the previous book in order to follow the next one. I have yet to read My Friends by Frederick Bachman, which is another one that I really want to read this year. I really enjoyed Anxious People, as I've mentioned before, and this is his new release, and I've heard really good things about it. Some people are saying this is like their favorite book, or it is life-changing, and so I really want to get to this one. I'm kind of in a sci-fi fantasy feel right now, and this is more of contemporary fiction, which I think is why I haven't picked it up yet, because I want to keep that momentum of fantasy and sci-fi going for now. But it's one that I'm definitely interested in, and one I will probably pick up within the next couple of weeks. I also talked about rereading some manga series. I've decided to reread both Spy Family and Kaiju number 8 for different reasons. We've started watching the anime for Spy Family with our kids recently, and so I'd like to go back and catch up. I think I only got through like volume 4 or 5 on this before I dropped it. Now I think we have through 12 or 13. So that's one I'm definitely wanting to get. And I chose this one because, not only because we're watching it, but because it is a comedy series, something more lighthearted, and I'm kind of in that mood for something a little bit silly. Similarly with Kaiju number 8, at least in parts, especially at the beginning, it is kind of a silly manga about a guy who turns into a monster and like is scaring children even though he's doing his best to help. It becomes more of an action shonen as the story goes on, but having some idea of where the story is going, I think might make reading the early chapters have a bit more of an idea of like what to expect coming up, and so I'd like to reread it knowing where the story is heading. So some other potential reads in the coming weeks, I might pick up Nona the Ninth because I talked about how I didn't want to leave too much space between these stories. Similar to Dungeon Crawler Carl, I think that you need to have a good grasp on what came before in this series in order to read the next book. And I don't want to leave too big of a gap between them and have to go back and reread a previous volume. There is a fourth book apparently being worked on. I don't know if it's out yet or if it's coming out, but I definitely want to be up to date as best I can before the last in this series hits the shelves. And finally, some other potential reads for the future are The Sea of Tranquility and The Last Wish. Both of these are books that I received as prizes for summer reading last year, and we are now doing summer reading for this year, and I still have not touched these, so they've been on my shelf for a year, and I thought it would be a fun video to read them and talk about them. Ooh, something horrible has happened to the cover of this book. So these are a couple of others. This is the first in the Witcher series, and then I have no idea what Sea of Tranquility is about. I just know that it was, I think it was on speculative fiction or sci-fi, and so I'll take a look at it. I know I read it at one point and thought it sounded interesting, so that'll be 2 more books that I can potentially look at. A nice hefty stack of books to potentially jump into. I will see you in a few weeks, but that's going to be all for today. Thank you for coming by and listening to me ramble about a couple of books that I read this week. As always, I hope your reading journey is going well. I hope that you are continuing to read what you love, and even if you have a slow week, know that, progress is progress. As always, please like, comment, and subscribe so we can grow this corner of our BookTube community. And until the next one, take care.